Hey everyone, and welcome to the Psyched to Practice podcast, your one stop for practical and useful clinical information, masterful insight from experts in the field, and a guide to daily living. I'm your host, Paul Wagner, and joining me is
Ray Christner.
And, we have a kind of a timely episode here, Ray, and we want to talk about politics. And, we kind of kick this around because, wow, what a heavy topic, but also I feel like we're doing a disservice if we're not working to talk about it, but we also want to really be informed and intentional with how we talk about it.
Yeah, it's the topic we're never supposed to talk about, right?
Absolutely.
We get told shouldn't talk about politics with people, but yeah, I think you're right. Timely. I mean, we're now just a few months out from, I think, what most people would say is a big presidential election, and already we've seen a whole bunch of whirlwind that's come from it. And, it's interesting because I think as this comes, clinically, I start hearing from patients and, talking about their own anxiety or the conflict that's happening. And something that, has been part of our society for many, many years.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, now that we have all these media outlets and sources of how we get information, I think for a lot of people, it's truly an overwhelming time.
And in some ways, we're exposed whether we want to be or not. And,
right.
I've been working in some ways to take a bit of a hiatus from the news and the exposure and kind of, doing some of my own self-care pieces with that. And I'm inundated with it. And so I can't say I'm going on my way to reduce those political ads, but I'm going on my way to reduce ads in general. And yet still just the information coming in, and either, that's being targeted information from, website banners, or if it's coming up in a conversation, or, I'm listening to a podcast and they're talking about it, kind of like right now,
right.
But, hopefully here working to not necessarily having a specific agenda on one side or the other, but rather working to have the agenda of how do we become informed consumers for politics and for information?
Yeah. And we will not have political ads. And I think, you're right. I think it's interesting because I think it's such a passive experience for us that, we hear ads, they're on all the time. And I'm not even sure that we always listen to them, but there's still parts that we do, attend to. And I don't know what it is currently with this election, but I remember reading something that back in, I want to say it was the 2016 election, or maybe it was 2020, that the average adult during the political season before a presidency heard 500 ads.
Wow.
Which just think of that, the volume of that, right? So, it's when we put on our news feed, it's when we listen to the radio, it's when we watch TV, pick up a newspaper, drive down the road, we see billboards,
see yard signs. Yeah.
We see yard signs. Right. And there's so much that is just with us all the time. And I think it's interesting taking a hiatus. I mean, I give you credit. I don't know how that would even work. I think it's just such a difficult thing.
Well, and I don't know that it's going that well because I still feel like I'm fairly inundated. I'm not informed, but I know I'm not informed, or at least I know how much I'm uninformed. And so when people are coming in and sharing things, I recognize I don't have too much of a preconceived bias, or, oh my gosh, did you hear about blank? And it's maybe, but I don't know too much. And I think that's an important piece. And one of the things that we're really working to identify here today is that, we're in a polarized climate, and, really just the intensity of this election, it really feels like, people are, lining up on one side and lining up on the other. And there's this very, very clear divide. And I think that makes it hard for us to then have informed decisions and informed information, because what we're hearing is either rhetoric from one side or rhetoric within our own party. And, we have to kind of stop and ask ourselves, well, how much of this is accurate? And where is this coming from?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's, it is something we've dealt with forever, but, it just seems like now the intensity of it. And I think for me, the reason I really wanted to do this topic is the impact on people.
Yeah,
where
absolutely.
I hear more people saying, I don't want to talk to this person because we know politics are going to come up. Or maybe people that are literally having anxiety about the future because, what they're hearing is, wow, if this person gets elected, this is going to happen. And if the other person gets elected, this is going to happen. And, it's where it actually does take such an emotional toll on us and, uncertainty. And then having parents get that, then kids who, I don't remember as a kid really being all that much into politics. Yeah. But I've had young kids that I've seen who come in and are like, well, if this happens, we have to be prepared because, all these things are going to change in the world. And it's like, wow, gosh, how do you be a kid?
Yeah.
So yeah. I think that for me, I think that's my concern with politics is, yes, this polarizing dynamic that then turns into other manifestations, be it anxiety or depression or whatever it might be for.
Yeah. And the importance of recognizing, that fear piece and, this, us saying this isn't to discredit either side. And I think as we're saying, hey, it's kind of, I guess, mongering to this fear in a way. And there is going to be an evocative reaction. If there's something that feels threatened to you, then it's like, well, you're discrediting this, but that's the piece. Both sides are feeling that. And I think that's the kind of important to recognize because on the one side, if we have I'm, my rights are being restricted, the other side saying, well, my rights are going to be restricted.
Right.
And really this idea of this aligning with our political parties, I think comes in from this perspective that says, what's going to be the party that's going to work in my interest to reduce my fears?
Yeah, that's, and I've heard that from people. I've had people who say, I'm voting for this political party because they have fear of maybe what's going to happen with their kids for education or whatever it might be, or, what their children's future will be. And, gosh, the ads really do try to evoke that in us, right? It's, just last night watching TV, I've seen Kamala ads and I've seen Trump ads, and both of them were telling you why the world will be unsafe and a worse place if the other person gets elected.
And sometimes I think they also are trying to say, and here we are, the solution.
Right.
And other times they leave us hanging and just say, yeah, no, the world's going to be a worse place with, if you vote for this candidate.
Right. Yeah. And it's, and I think even sometimes when they, I think the interesting part with political ads for me, and I'm a skeptic. I'm a skeptic about way too much stuff. But when I hear it, I go, gosh, no one's actually told me how they're going to fix it. So, okay, this person, is going to do something that's going to make the world safe. But don't just tell me you're going to be the opposite. How are you going to be the opposite? And I think that's the part that I don't think we focus enough on trying to get deeper than somebody just saying they're a better candidate. Yeah. And I think that's why it becomes so emotional for us. We really don't ever hear an answer. I'm kind of a little bit of a political nerd. When I hear there's debates coming, I'm excited about that. I like to watch that. But why I want to is I truly want to hear, don't just say the other person's the scary person or this person that's going to do all of these things that's going to change my life. Tell me what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And if we don't look at that, I think that makes our fears even worse.
And can you imagine if this was in other professions in such a profound way where if you're electing for a surgery and you're kind of between two surgeons, and all you're hearing is about how that other surgeon's going to kill you. It's what are you? How are you going to treat me? That's what I want to know.
Right.
What's the course of treatment? How are we going to resolve this? If I'm going to be safe, and that's really what we're looking for. We're looking for the information, not again just that trying to kind of deface or really kind of undercut the other side of that. Or again, saying like, hey, no problem. I got this for you. You don't have to worry at all. I'm going to take care of you.
Right.
What are you going to do? No worries. Yeah. I got
yeah. It is kind of funny. Like as you said that, I'm thinking like, is there another profession that our approach to other people in that profession, for lack of a better term, our competition, do we say things that are going to frighten people to go there? So like Burger King and McDonald's don't say, hey, don't go to Burger King because you're going to get food poisoning. They say, we have a better product. Yeah. And come here. It's bigger, it's better, it's cheaper, or whatever it's going to be. Or doctors, it's not, hey, this person's going to kill you. It's, hey, I trained really hard and I have this credential. It's interesting. Why don't we hold politicians to the same standard as that? Like it's, we're like, I don't know. Is there another advertisement that we see that just puts you in fear of the competition? So marketing in politics just takes a different base. And I think, again, it's why it is so stressful for people. It's, and I get some people not wanting to even get involved in it because it's hearing all of these bad things. And I don't know. I just don't think that, it's definitely not good for people, but I don't know that, our podcast probably is not going to change the way political advertisements happen.
I don't know that we have that reach.
Right. But it's, I do think for people listening, it's things to think about, like, so when you do have an emotional reaction, why, what is it? And, a lot of times with patients, that's the conversations I'll have is, why do you have that reaction? And, is there a factual basis? And, we'll talk about some tips for people, but it's really getting people to be more thoughtful.
And, I'm curious, you said something earlier and you kind of used it as an example of, hey, I'm afraid about the impact that this election is going to have on my child's education.
Yeah.
And I'd be willing to bet that the individuals who are listening to the podcast heard that in the lens of their own political party.
Yeah.
And I would almost challenge you, like, how do you step outside of that and work to hear it in the lens of the other political party? And in a way that doesn't do it with judgment, or in a way that doesn't do it with bias. And it's like, oh yeah, but like, yeah, what do they have to worry about? Because that's a statement we could also make about either political party. And, if we can kind of think about that, how we contextualize information, how we really, again, only filter it through a certain particular lens. And that's dangerous because, what is it that we're missing? And that's this whole other side of the political spectrum. And so I don't want to advocate, don't compromise on your values and your morals and how they help to guide you, in choosing your political party, but also don't demonize the values and morals of others as well. And how do we work to hear and understand, even if we don't agree?
Yeah, I agree 100% with you. Right. It's, we talked about this when we talked about disagreements in an earlier episode to some extent, but, I said, I love politics and part of it is really trying to understand both sides and understanding, why do people have that? And I think it's easy for us to dismiss what the other side's concerned about. And, and I won't get into, I guess, maybe specifics just because of patient confidentiality, but I've had patients that when they talk about their fears, I understand it. Like I go, oh yeah. Okay. I get it. Like that makes perfect sense. But that doesn't mean that the other side doesn't also have fears. I think that's the part that, we do have to kind of look at it. And I think the other part to this is that, when we hear politics, we most of the time hear, I think you said it's the vocal minority, right? Yeah. It's this group of people that they're saying it louder, they're saying it stronger. When I talk to most people, they might be leaning in a direction one way or the other and have an opinion about it, but it might not create such want to say anger toward the other side. It's more that like fear and saying, yeah, hey, I worry about this. Like, these are where my values are, and I want those values for my kids. And again, I think both political sides, they have their own piece that we have to acknowledge, that just because it's different doesn't make it wrong. And I know there's probably somebody out there going, oh no, there are things that are really wrong. Sure, probably on both sides. Yeah. We could probably come up with a number of statements, but much of it, it's just different points of view, and we can't forget about that. In politics, the other piece of this, and we didn't mention this earlier, is that we buy into personalities a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other piece of it. Like, we don't like a certain person more than we don't like necessarily the underlying political beliefs of a party. At least the intensity. The intensity comes with people. And I mean, just got to turn on the TV and you can hear somebody hating one candidate or the other, that are very personal attacks. But we need to really kind of go, okay, what is it that's just the belief of the party, and moving away from the people? And I know that's hard because we elect people more.
And, go back like that, the vocal minority landing on that extreme. And I can't help but think of, I guess, a reverse standard distribution, where the highest intensity is coming at those polarizing ends, where I guess it is more of a standard distribution in the terms of like, where do the majority of people end up, laying? But if we're looking at who we hear, that's the reverse. And that's that piece there. So we have to really recognize, like, as we're labeling the opposition, who is it that we're truly labeling? And it's a minority, and it's a minority on both ends. If you're a conservative, if there's a certain like dislike towards, individuals who are, more liberal, there's probably more of a minority that you dislike. The majority you disagree with. And, same with, for liberals, if you dislike conservatives, there's a minority that you dislike, you disagree with the majority. And I think that's an important distinction, or hate, if we go with that intensive language, for us to be able to hate someone, like we should really know someone truly and deeply well to be able to hate them. And yet again, it's something that we can cultivate through like this, like emotional manipulation that the media puts out there, that we're being told on within our own party, within the opposing party. And, just kind of the echo chamber that our political parties can be. We don't hear a lot of the outside influence. And I think it's easy to then get into that groupthink mentality, and we're not stopping and really saying, again, how does this align with my own personal beliefs, my own personal values? And, and I can't help but think, talking about did hear about this in the media, how at least there for a bit, Tenacious D separated because, Jack Black heard Kyle saying something about like, the assassination attempt on Trump, like, oh man, we almost got him, or something along those lines. And
right.
It's like,
very offensive. Yeah. Right.
And like this, like, I don't know that it's a bad policy to say, I'm not pro assassination, like on any attempt, but yet if that's something that we're hearing, again, echoing around, it has an influence, and really working to challenge that and saying, no, that's not okay for us to be, that's not okay for us to be believing, certainly not okay for us to be putting out there in a very public fashion.
Yeah. I think that's a good example to bring up, because there were people that said some pretty inappropriate things after the assassination attempt. Yeah. I've saw some of the media stuff, but that wasn't the majority. The majority of people who probably will never vote for Donald Trump were devastated by the fact that a president, had an assassination attempt. Like, there was no place for that. And I think, we heard that from, Democratic leaders. And I think, people that I know who, have said some not so nice things about Donald Trump, came out and said, gosh, man, this was a horrible day. This was, like, we never would wish that on somebody and their family. That didn't last long. Like, I think but we did. We had this little piece where as a country, I think people kind of came together and went, listen, this is way too far in the extreme end. But, it's when we look at like information though, like, I'm just going to use Facebook as an example. What we see on Facebook isn't that silent majority. It's usually the extreme comments that get made. And then that sets off extreme comments in another direction. Yeah. And then people share them and it kind of rolls. But I don't know a lot of that. And like I said, I'm a person who likes politics. Very rarely do I ever see something posted that I like that I go, oh, I'm really on board with that. Usually it is such an extreme thing that it's, it's just to rile people up.
And, I can't help but think, I didn't take very many business classes when I was going through my undergrad, but, there was a few marketing classes, and actually it was one marketing class and I had friends that were in it that I heard more of it. But even in some IO psychology classes where, advertising and, I think it's such an important thing for us to recognize the arguments that are being made. And, I use the term rhetoric quite a bit here, but like, where is this argument coming from? And, is it grounded in the logic? Is it a logos argument? Is it more of an emotionally evocative comment and, statement? And so it's that pathos, or, is it just the persona and the personality? Are we pulling on the ethos of who this person is and, what we ascribe to that person? And I think it's such a valuable thing to try to, go and inform ourselves and saying, what am I being sold? Because at the end of the day, it's marketing. We're being sold something. And how do they sell it? I don't know that we're going to spend the time to go through the, just the detailed, the laws that are being generated in those pieces there. We're going to get the snapshot, and then we're going to get the snapshot that has some sort of emotional attachment to it. So the small piece, the small fragment that's going to be, kind of unbiased and logical. And we're going to surround it in this because it's what sells, and it's going to be what creates movement. And certainly I can get charged up with those pieces, as I'm reading. So I'm like, I can't believe this, but how do I work to be more aware so that way I don't let it go too far? I don't let it get so carried away that that's all that I'm seeing and that's all that I'm experiencing.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that, I think the idea of thinking of this from a marketing standpoint, I think that's a great way to look at it, because I think that helps us break it down different. I think it's, there's a reason why they put those things out, and we're consumers of that. I think that we don't think of ourselves as that, but I think that's a great point. But so, maybe let's talk about some tips to help people. How do they then break through this a little bit? And, not that it's going to be stress-free. That's part of being in a democracy. We're going to have those kind of arguments and those things, but maybe to do it in a way that doesn't have as much of an impact either on relationships or anxiety. So, for me, I'm a research person. I always tell people is, listen, just because the media says it doesn't necessarily makes it true. If it's on Facebook, it's probably not true. Like there's a good chance that it's skewed in some ways. But, finding some ways that we can fact check a little bit and go, is this really how it's being portrayed? Is that the truth behind it? And, I think there's a lot of ways we can do that, and some are easier than others. But, I think one is, there are news outlets that are much more balanced, that they're not really pushing a left or a right agenda. They really do kind of set in the middle, and, sources like Newsweek or Forbes that really don't have as much of a political identity, might be sources that we're going to trust maybe a little bit more. BBC is an outlet, which, is a British TV, but they cover many American, situations, but places like that we can go to. Or, for me, if I hear about something, I tend to go to the source. So if somebody's talking about some law that's going to change, I read the law. Now, I would not suggest that necessarily for everybody, especially when some of them are like 1,200 pages that you go like, wow, like, how do these politicians read all of this to actually make a vote? They have a staff that helps, but, but it's something that we can go to. And I think also looking at some fact checking sites.
Yeah.
But you had kind of mentioned one, I think, earlier.
Yeah, I was looking a bit early, and I was looking at the Associated Press site, and they actually have it's the AP fact check. And I think the Associated Press as working to be more in that moderate view. I do think that they skew it slightly, but if in this intention to be, okay, here's our fact checking. One of the nice things is that they're working to give a source. They're working to say, like, here's where we're getting that information from. And this is that, working to have that be more informed, while also working to identify what are the statements and comments being made that are leaning more right or leaning more left. And so I think there's value in the fact that they're calling both sides out. And so again, not something that I think is perfect, but something that we can go to specifically and say, hey, how accurate is this information that's getting put out there?
Yeah, I like that. I'm glad you mentioned about the sources. That's one of the things that for myself, if I'm, trying to look at something, I want to look at a fact check that's going to tell me how they check the facts. And I think Politico does that as well. Like, I think Politico has a fact check. And, the important part isn't just that they say it's true or false. What did they look at? Who did they contact? How did they reach that decision? And, again, is it a perfect science? Probably not, but it's definitely going to be a better level. And,
I think I commented on it before you, but when we're saying about like different tips and things that we can take away, like, I do think, you don't have to go and pursue a degree in it, but like, learn some marketing strategies, like, learn how you're being sold certain information. And, I remember hearing it, and I do try to keep this in mind, like, if I'm not spending money on something, then I'm the product. So like, how is our data being used against us? And I said earlier, I'm not purposely going out and trying to consume a ton of news right now. As we get closer to the election, yeah, I'll probably go and steep myself and try to have that informed, but I'd rather have a lot to go through than dragging myself through it all. But until then, man, I'm still getting ad banners and, pop-ups and things like that. Can't tell you the number of text messages I've gotten.
Oh yeah.
And
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. And just this idea, and we're currently in the market, like starting to talk to some car dealerships. And one of the things I can't help but think every time I'm talking is, creating scarcity and working to provide a solution. And, we're talking like, oh, hey, this is not going to be here. Like, so when can we get you in? And we're talking, like, my wife and I were talking like, hey, maybe 2025, we're actually looking to make this. And they're trying to say, hey, can I get you down for next week? Because this, this vehicle isn't going to be here. The shortage and the chips and, where the inflation rates. And it's like, they can make it compelling. Like, they are good at what they do. They evoke a sense of like, oh, urgency. Like, and it's, maybe I do need to act on this. And then I'm being sold on all the features that it's going to make my life, incredible to do these things. And yet, okay, how do I step back and say, no, in some ways, I'm kind of being manipulated by marketing. And, if we can be aware of it, I want us to be an informed consumer.
Yeah. I'm going to give an example that we've probably heard in a lot of different ways, but I remember reading somewhere about marketing where they said, pay attention to marketing that's trying to get you to run from something, and instead look at marketing that's trying to get you to move towards something. And I think that, we hear that about jobs and hear about like a lot of different ways. But, for me, when I think of marketing, in a political sense, I don't give a whole lot of credence to ads that are trying to get me to run from something. Like, don't tell me why I shouldn't vote for somebody else.
Yeah.
Tell me why I should vote for you. And that's, I think that's a really good rule of thumb for people that do get stressed by politics or, find, this whole political season to be difficult is, try to find those sources that try to tell you why things might be better for them. And I think that's a better marketing. It's a better marketing to pay attention to.
Yeah.
I can tell you terrible things about a whole bunch of stuff, but the actual ability of saying, here's why you should kind of move in our direction. I think that's the marketing that's going to hold better value.
And yeah, fear is evocative. And, I don't know that we should be making those decisions based off emotions. I want to make an informed, logical decision. And, had it in my notes here, and I've read it so many times, and I'm like, oh, if this fits here, do I throw it into it? This fits here. And so the importance of discerning between extreme viewpoints and the much more nuanced reality. And I think the reality has to be more nuanced. Like, I don't want a 30-second YouTube ad to sway my decision. Like that's no, like, I don't want that to do it for anyone. Like, and yet, like, if it's creating like, jobs and healthcare and, your rights as an individual, and it feels threatened. It's like, oh, okay. Yeah, no, I don't want that. It's like, why am I letting this short snippet inform a decision that's so important and so significant? And so making sure we are looking at that nuanced reality.
Yeah, I think that's great. And, I think the last one I think maybe to talk about is a little bit about just self-reflection. And, with all of that, before we react, pause a little bit, before we're fearful of it, and pause and think, why are we having those reactions? And, listen, I've had ads that stir something up in me, and, it's easy to do, but usually I'll step back and just kind of go, okay, why did I have that reaction? What's the belief that for me is important, or the value that's important that's causing that emotion? I think as we go through this, we'll always make better decisions, or at least decisions that we're more comfortable with, if we take that time to just take a moment and pause and think about it. And why is one view versus, and
self-reflection, and maybe even some open, I would say in spaces where we feel safe to do so, creating more open dialogue and open discussions, and being able to explore our true beliefs. So often in the therapy setting, like, if someone's talking like, oh, I don't want to think about it, I want to think about that. And I'm like, we have this conversation of like, are we ever going to resolve it if we're never spending time thinking about it? And so if we're not spending the time to really kind of bring it to light and understand it and look at it from different angles and scrutinize it, it's going to linger there in the shadows. And we don't know where it starts. We don't know where it stops. And I think, these beliefs or these reactions and responses very much the same. And we need to be able to, whether it's in self-reflection or maybe, to our families and loved one, wow, I'm feeling a certain way about that. Like, if we can, let's stop and talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I love the political conversations I have with people in life. And I don't hear a lot of people say that. And the reason I think I do is that I want to hear the other opinions. I want to hear the other sides. I want it to make me think and not react. And at the end of the day, I'm going to react when I vote. That's going to happen. But it's not going to be because I'm angry. It's probably not going to be because I'm anxious. It's probably going to be because I took time to thoughtfully think. And I'm sure emotions get in there somewhere, but it's worth listening. And I think I've learned so much from, patients and friends that have different beliefs. And, I think that's what makes our political system so great is I don't want to hear just one side. I want to hear both. And I don't want to agree on everything. And, I've yet to find, I think, any political view that I'm 100% in agreement with all the time. And that's good. I think that's the positive.
And not necessarily as a means of managing stress, but something I do think is important is, if you have the opportunity to vote, I think you should go and vote. And again, you're free to make those choices, but I don't care what candidate you vote for, but go and vote informed, I guess, and so being able to have that information for yourself and doing so from a place that says, okay, I'm taking a step that feels like it's a good fit for me versus I'm reacting in a way that's uninformed. And I don't think that that's ever a bad thing.
Yeah, I think, and I'm glad you brought that point because I do think that's what empowers all of us. As we're talking American politics. So in the United States, that is the power that we have. And I think that you're right. I think when we go in and we make that decision, win or lose, it does give us that sense that we are part of the process.
Yeah.
Good or bad, we're still part of it.
Absolutely. Well, with that, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Join us in 2 weeks. But until then, be well, stay psyched. The information contained in this podcast and on the Psyched to Practice website is intended for informational and educational purposes only. Nothing in this podcast or on the website is intended to be a substitute for professional, psychological, psychiatric, educational, or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please note that no professional-patient relationship is formed here, and similarly, no supervisory or consultative relationship is formed between the host, guests, and listeners of this podcast. If you need the qualified advice of a mental health professional or practitioner, please contact services in your area. Similarly, if you need supervision on clinical matters, please locate a supervisor with experience to fit your professional needs.